All right, thanks for joining us this afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Amundsen. I'm the COCA Executive Director, and I am excited to have this session tonight with Dr. Brandon Briery, who is COCA's president. And also in Brandon's day job, he is the Chief Program Officer and Executive Camp Director at Camp in Texas. And tonight he is going to be presenting on camper and staff, because we can't forget about them. Their behavior is influenced by a lot more than cancer. So before we get started, we're going to do a shameless plug to talk about some of the things that we have coming up in a couple of months. Believe it or not, camp is upon you, and I know you're very busy getting ready. We're going to pause over the summer with our webinars and town halls and education, and then we'll get cranking back in September. And in September, we're going to talk about not only camper enrollment and engagement, but we're also going to be talking about volunteers and some of the challenges that we've been hearing lately from our member camps about their enrollment numbers this year for campers and volunteers. So on to Brandon. So glad to have you here tonight, Brandon, and I am going to turn it over to you.
All right, friends, I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll get rolling. I'll tell you that I hope that we'll have some time to really interact a little bit, and so that you're not just sitting here listening to me for the duration of the time that we have together, because you may have questions that I haven't specifically answered in the slides that I've already prepared, and I really want to hear from you and some of the challenges that maybe you anticipate facing or you faced in the past, and really tailor it to what is going to serve you best. So with no further ado, let's jump right in. Well, I guess I will tell you one other thing, is that on the very last slide, there will be a bit.ly link as well as a QR code. So you can have a copy of all of these slides. And I also added one little bonus set of links for a related session that I had done at COCA several years ago in 2018 on child development broadly, that has some other nuggets in it that might prove helpful for you. So you'll have access to both of those. All right, going on from there, the first thing that if I can get this to advance. Okay, there we go. Sorry, my computer with all the screens and everything was just not wanting to cooperate for a minute. But the best staff are the prepared staff. And so you guys really taking the time to think these things through in advance of the busiest season of the year, and then to equip the staff who are working with you is the best thing we can do is being prepared and trying to make sure that we anticipate as much as we can. You can never plan for everything. That's one of the exciting things about camp, and also one of the scary things about camp. No matter how hard you prepare, there are always going to be those little surprises that come along. But hopefully some of the tools that we'll talk about today will help if some of these surprises happen along your journey. So, I feel like in what we all do in our camps, in the microcosm of where our sphere of influence is, we set out to change the world. We do what we can at camp so that those ripples of kindness and empowerment and everything that is central to our missions at our camps hopefully lives beyond the week of camp and travels beyond the gates of camp or the doors of camp, or whatever our setting is. And so in doing that, we do set out to change the world, but regardless of our intentions, the world is changing, and we have to acknowledge that, prepare for it, and ride that wave a little bit. So in thinking about that, I would love to hear from you guys. You can pop it in the chat or just turn on your mics for a minute if you want to just shout it out. But how has the pandemic impacted campers and staff that you have seen from a MASH, a mental and emotional health perspective? Any thoughts?
Oh, well, it looks like I'm not even muted. I think families are actually looking to be more engaged as they were prior to the pandemic.
Oh, they're hungry for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen both ends where like some of the parents, I see Natalie saying there, some parents are more hesitant to send their children to camp. I've also seen it where we've had more of our parents who want to come and be volunteers at camp, which I'm sure is also tying into that hesitancy of sending their kid away on their own. So they want to come and, I don't know so much helicopter, but still at least be around at camp.
Sure. Other thoughts or observations?
I think I'm seeing too some of the social resiliency of children on both ends. I think some kiddos have really struggled with during the pandemic and that socialization, and they're struggling at camp, like seeing more behavioral needs, seeing more, just challenges. But then also some of those kiddos are really craving social interaction. So I think we just have a much broader spectrum and really dramatic ends of that spectrum.
Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts or observations?
I was also going to throw out there, like, I think I've seen kids understanding of boundaries not quite exist, just because they've been so used to digital stuff. I know, especially last year at camp, there were a couple of kids who were having a conversation about another kid that was like 15 feet away. And it's like, yeah, you're not on your phone or Snapchat anymore. Like, everyone around you can hear you. It's not private. So just a little bit of that is gone.
Yeah, great observation. And and we've talked, I've heard a lot of things about camper parents and campers themselves. What about staff? What are the impacts that you guys are seeing from the staff and volunteer perspective?
I think we've seen some of the staff's needs are a little bit greater. We kind of joke, everybody always has a little baggage. It used to come in a little small cosmetic bag, but last couple of years, it seems like the steamer trunks have been brought. So I think, we all work to be there for the kids and putting them first, but we've just found that our staff have a lot greater needs of support than they have in years past too.
Yeah. Well, and if you guys have hung out with me any in the last year or two, you probably heard me beating that drum about just the coping skills and resiliency, grit, those kind of things that is just at a different level today than it was even 5 years ago. And and that's among staff, volunteers, and campers. And I don't think it's all to do with the pandemic. I think we were already on that path, largely driven by social media and some of the things that Derek was pointing out about filters that people just don't have necessarily anymore. And so anyway, there are a lot of influences. So a lot of things that we need to be watching out for. And that was kind of the point that I just, wanted to hear your thoughts and make sure that the things that I'm seeing are also the things that you're seeing. And it sounds like exactly they are. We have a lot of commonalities across the camping world in some of those observations. So where are all of these pieces of the puzzle going to fit? So first of all, when we're thinking about behavior, we look at the ABCs, the antecedents, the behavior, and the consequences. We'll go into more detail about some of these things as we follow through. But antecedents, the things that come prior to the behavior, and typically when we think antecedents, it's like what was the trigger, what came right before the behavior, then the behavior itself, And then what were the consequences? How did we follow through on it? What were the natural consequences? What were other kids' reactions? What, all of those things are part of the consequences. It's not just about punishment or things, and sometimes people get stuck in that, but there are natural consequences, social consequences, all kinds of consequences that either serve to reinforce or punish certain types of behavior and make it more or less likely to occur again. So anyway, we'll think about all those things as we go through today. Some strategies that I always like to recommend are proaction, redirection, and intervention. We'll dig into those really deeply here in a minute. And then we also want to think about the kids we're serving, and particularly for kids who are on active treatment for cancer, or for some who are post-treatment, but have some late effects going on, some different cognitive effects, sometimes some physical effects that linger. But we know that, particularly for kids with cancer, but it could happen for other kids that we don't even know that there is a diagnosis, or maybe they don't even have a diagnosis, but still there could be someone who has some processing speed delays. It just takes them a little longer to like hear and understand and process what's going on. It certainly is probably one that we see more often with attentional difficulties, especially when you link attentional difficulties with hyperactivity. Those kids tend to be ones that do get attention from others, and not always in a positive way. I like to call them festive campers, and we'll talk about them a little later as well. But for a lot of kids with cancer, it's more the inattention and not the hyperactivity that comes bubbling forth. And because of that, they're often kind of quiet and don't act out in classrooms or in other situations. So until they start having grades that are going down in school, for example, no one may realize that they're having attentional problems because they're not getting the teacher's attention, because they're not causing problems in the classroom. But knowing that that is a very common feature for kids who are either actively on treatment or post-treatment is good for us to remember. Memory difficulties also often come along with treatment. And then beyond those treatment effects, we also know that some kids are just attention seekers, and they're going to find ways to get our attention no matter what we, do or don't do. And the more we don't do, they're probably more likely to seek our attention in less appealing ways for us. So, that's part of our proaction strategies that we'll talk about in a minute. But then another thing that is often very true for many of our campers is that they do want to please. Like, if we give them clear expectations and opportunities to do the right thing and to kind of create the opportunities for them to shine and get attention in the good ways, then yeah, they like that. I agree with what Beverly posted in the chat, that yes, COVID has created fuzzy brains also. So it's not always about chemo or radiation. It can also be long COVID that is affecting folks. So many different things going on there. So as we then move forward, and Lynn was talking about this, I liked the idea of the cosmetic bag that's now the steamer trunk. But yeah, there is other baggage that campers and staff bring to camp with them that is not what's packed in their suitcase. And these we think as precipitating events. So the antecedents are what happens like right before a behavior. The precipitating events are kind of that long history of, who someone is and what influences their patterns of behavior and all of that. Sometimes that can be affected by other diagnoses that we might know or we might not know. It could be the ADHD diagnosis that doesn't get identified because the parent doesn't want to send them to camp on medication. for that, so they're just not going to acknowledge it. I don't know if anybody's ever had that happen at camp before. I certainly have seen it. Maybe they have a diagnosis of autism, or we know that kids with Down syndrome are much more likely to have leukemia than the general population. So there are different affecting diagnoses that are not cancer, but certainly have that comorbid, lots of undiagnosed ADHD or ASD. Which is autism spectrum disorders. So those are, one piece of that puzzle. And then there are adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, that have gotten a lot more attention in our world of concentrating more on the mesh needs of folks in the trauma-informed care world that we live in. And some of those adverse childhood experiences, experiencing or witnessing violence, abuse, or neglect, having a family member attempt or die by suicide, growing up in a household with substance use problems, mental health problems, and instability due to parental separation or household members being in jail or prison. There have been a number of studies out there that have linked prospective potential for mental health issues in children are more predicted by parent mental health issues than anything else. If you grow up in a household with a parent who has a serious mental health issue, there's possibly a genetic factor involved, but there's also possibly an environmental factor that's involved, and more likely than that, even a mesh of those two things in the what psychologists like to call the diathesis stress model, that there's a predisposition, that's the diathesis, but it's put under a certain stress, which is the home environment, and that kind of triggers it to come out. So all of these things, it's a lot for us to keep in mind. And I don't want us to get so focused on it that we forget that campers are campers, and getting to know them, meet them as individuals, not going in, even when we have that profile from the application, or maybe they are a repeat camper, or maybe we have some information because we have a relationship with the hospital or clinic, and so we have this information of these are challenges that they have going on, these are things that we've seen, mental health, this is behavioral displays that they have had in the hospital setting or at camp before, whatever. I always want us to take those with a grain of salt. Like, we need to know about them and be prepared in case we need to address it, but we don't want to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy, because we all grow, we all get better, we all change over time. And if we don't meet the camper or the staff member where they are right now this year and base something on a history, we're doing them a disservice. We're kind of pigeonholing them and not allowing them to be their best selves. So I think those are some other factors that we always want to bear in mind. So then moving on, what is behavior? Basically, all behavior for any of us is communication. It is a way that people are trying to tell us something. For those of us who have good verbal communication skills, we may communicate in that way more. For people who don't have as good of verbal communication skills, it may come out as physical aggression. It may be that they have good verbal communication, but are just not comfortable talking about whatever their specific issue is. And because they don't know how else to communicate that, it comes out as behavior. But, I really I said this earlier when I was talking about how we set out to change the world and need to recognize the world is changing. For my camp, we recently did a deep dive and reevaluated and rewrote what our core values are, and reaffirmed some things, and then kind of tweaked some things and changed them around a little bit. And so for us, dignity, respect, and belonging are our core values at camp. And part of dignity is recognizing that we are all individuals and that we owe one another that respect that comes next, to be ourselves, but we also have to respect others and live within community guidelines. And ultimately, because we're creating this community of dignity and respect, it leads to a culture of belonging where people really feel like, you know, this is home for me. This is a place where I'm accepted regardless of my challenges. And so behavior is part of that. And when we think about the dignity piece, one of my pet peeves is hearing staff say, oh, this is a behavior camper, or that's a behavior kid. You know what? We're all behavior people. Like, we all have behaviors. You guys sitting here listening to me rattle on today is a behavior. You're sitting attentively. Me sitting here rattling on is a behavior. Sleeping at night, eating, going to the bathroom, like our basic daily functions, all of it is behavior. So I don't like the idea of labeling somebody as a behavior kid, or even a kid with behavior using person first language doesn't really make that much better. I say, like, this camper has a history of some challenging behavior that we want to be on the lookout for. But again, we don't want to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. We don't want to pigeonhole them. We want to set them up for success. When we think about the communication that we all have, and this kind of goes back to that idea of people sometimes having better verbal communication skills than others, we all have a communication toolbox. And for many of us, we have a lot of tools in our toolbox, and we can read the minute gestures and facial expressions and other pieces of communication that are going on. So we have, like the little precision screwdrivers that you might work on an eyeglasses set with, or the needle nose pliers that reach in and grab whatever. Like, we have these fine tools for communication. For some people, they don't have all of those tools, and maybe they only have a sledgehammer in their toolbox, and if they need to get your attention for something, they come out with the sledgehammer. And because there are these differences in people's abilities to communicate and what could lead to behavior, we really need to think of both the form and the function of behavior, and really concentrate mostly on the function. I think too often we hear people focusing on the form. Well, he was hitting, he was kicking, she was biting people. Okay, that's the form. That's what happened. Yes, those things are bad. We don't want that to happen. But what were they communicating? What was going on? And so really digging in and becoming almost like a private investigator to get to that function of the behavior is where we're really going to be able to make an impact. And so knowing what some common functions are is one piece of that. So knowing that to get or obtain something is one very common function. It could be an opportunity they're trying to get, an object, or attention. Another one that's sort of opposite is to escape or avoid something, which could be a person, a situation, someone. Little story. I'll do a little camper story for you because it just popped into my head. Years ago, really like 30 years ago, I was a young counselor at a camp, and we did have a week of camp that summer for kids with cancer, but this was actually a camp for kids who were deaf. And there was a camper in my cabin who had been coming to camp for a while. He was actually from my hometown, and I had known him when I was in high school with some he was in the elementary school at the time, and I had done some volunteer stuff that had, had an opportunity to work with him a little bit. But he was my camper, and man, he was just awesome. Like, he loved camp, everything. But we did a camp out night every Wednesday night, and he would avoid camp out night like nothing else. There was always, oh, I don't feel good, I think I need to go to the infirmary. It was like there was always something. And as a young counselor who probably wasn't super well trained in behavior, I was just like, come on, man, it's gonna be fun. I was just like doing all the encouragement things. And finally it hit me. He's deaf, profoundly deaf, can't hear anything. You're out in the woods, it's dark at night, you can't see anything. It was scary, and had I not really kind of taken the step back to figure out the function, like, this is the root problem. It's that he feels overwhelmed by the lack of sensory information, and he's not just trying to be an attention seeker or a challenge, like there was like a really thing. And so we ended up with a solution of getting him a lantern that he could, like a battery operated lantern. He was fine after that. So sometimes if we focus too much on the form, we lose sight of the function and lose sight of a potential solution that may be not only a lot simpler, but save a lot of angst along the way. Sensory needs are another thing that can lead to behavior, and more so than in the case of my friend David. This is probably something that we see most often in campers who have autism spectrum disorder or some other developmental disability, that we see a lot of self-stimulation, stimming behaviors. But it could be for a variety of reasons. And it's often a struggle in working with those particular campers to know when those self-stimming behaviors start to increase. Is that a sign of anxiety? Because it can be. And then do we need to figure out a function of what's creating the anxiety? Or is it simply fulfilling a sensory need, and this is their way of just self-soothing, calming down, and we just need to let it happen? And honestly, you just have to spend some time getting to know the camper in those situations to figure out what that function is. And I think that's true for most of the situations. So all of those things in mind, I'm gonna kind of throw it back out to you guys to pop into the chat or turn on your mics. So what are some forms of behavior that you see at camp? And then what do you think you see? What is maybe the function that might be behind some of the things we see? And then we're going to talk about the actions we can take and what we can do to address it. So any thoughts on things that you see and what you think functions might be going on? And this could be campers or staff.
Well, I'm not sure if this is exactly answering that question, but I've noticed a trend for kids coming to camp who may have some sensory problems and things. I've actually started a Dungeons and Dragons that can go all day long, and if the kids want to check out and just go play Dungeons and Dragons, that's what they do. And I have this whole, the Nature Lodge is now the Dungeon and Dragon Lodge. So it's just morphed. Nobody's really interested in, the raccoon skins anymore. They're fine to play Dungeons and Dragons.
Beverly, I think that's a great creative action that you can take when you figure out, you know, that different people are different, and they need different things. And you know, I can say that sometimes I get spoiled in my camp because we don't, cancer is a very small part of what we do at Camp. We serve campers with a variety of medical conditions and disabilities, and a lot of campers who have cognitive challenges, and also those who have a lot of physical needs and caregiving needs. And because of the level of care or behavioral support that our campers typically need, we do a 1-to-1 camper counselor ratio. And because of that, we can be very creative and flexible and independent with campers. If, you know, if a camper just has a huge fear of horses, we're going to challenge them by choice, and we're going to give them opportunities like, oh, let's meet the mini horse first, and then, you know, get comfortable around the mini horse, you know. So we're going to try to take steps that help them overcome whatever fears. But if it's just not going to work, cool, you know what, go hang out in the pool, because that's what you want to do. And so I know that's easier said in my camp because of that 1-to-1 ratio that we have. It may not work in all camps, but finding those creative solutions like you did with offering the Dungeons and Dragons as a hangout spot, I think that's brilliant. I think that's, you know, meets kids where they are and fulfills the needs that they have. Other thoughts, ideas on either the questions on the screen or questions that have come up in the things we've talked about so far? All right, well, I will move on for now, but certainly if you come up with any questions, don't hesitate to either stop me or pop them in the chat, and we'll come back to it later. Some of the things that I see while I'm still on this slide, that I'll just give like a couple of examples, is that, again, sometimes for campers who have fewer verbal communication skills, we may see some aggression. It might come in pushing, hitting, biting, that sort of thing. But it may be that there are a lot of things they could be trying to express through that, right? It could be that they're feeling homesick. It could be that they have a headache. It could be that they are hungry, that they're thirsty, that they got their feelings hurt by something someone said or did, because even though they may not have the verbal communication skills themselves, it doesn't mean that they don't understand what other people are saying and doing around them. And people in general tend to treat those who don't communicate in typical ways as if they are not very smart, as if they are younger than their actual age. And that can become a big lack of dignity for those campers. So kind of on that note, I always train our staff that everyone you meet, you act as if they are your total peer, understand everything you're saying, your new best friend. And as you get to know one another, if you need to simplify your language and how you talk to them over time, you can do that. But if you start out babying them, talking baby talk to them, then you just lose their respect and cool points, quite honestly, that are so hard to win back. So, just meeting people where they are and anticipating that they're going to be like on level, just like you, and then adjusting from there if you need to. But it's much easier to adjust downward in that way than to try to regain some respect. I'm reading what Jade put in the chat. Demand avoidance, meltdowns, unsafe behaviors like threatening themselves or others, lots and lots of dysregulation, getting into power struggles with staff who only interact with kids at camp, and staff not knowing how to handle tantrums and meltdowns. Very good. And I'm going to give some suggestions here in some of the slides coming up that will directly address that, that hopefully will be helpful. And we can have further discussion on that if it doesn't answer all of the questions and concerns in that area as well. So great. Well, let's move on and talk about proaction. So proaction is setting up our environment for success. We want to do everything that we can to proactively engage with our campers so that they are so busy having fun with all the things at camp that they don't need to seek our attention in inappropriate ways, that they're getting lots of good attention for the right reasons. So the first thing on the list, just talk with and listen to your campers. Had a camper several years ago who, we said, how would you describe the perfect counselor? And he said, to me, the perfect counselor would be a big giant ear with arms that would just listen and hug me. And I just, I think that is not only really beautiful, but also so true for most of our campers. They don't always feel like people take the time and the patience to just sit and listen to them, to just let them be the focus. And for programs that serve siblings as well, I think that's really true for siblings a lot of the time, just because of the nature of the medical focus that's needed for patients. But even for patients, a lot of times, if they're spending a lot of time in the hospital or in clinics, then they may have a lot of their healthcare team that's just kind of coming in and taking care of business because they have a whole roster of patients and they can't just sit and spend time with them. Hopefully they have some folks that they see through child life or social work or psychology who do spend more time with them. But still, for those campers who are going through treatment, just having someone spend that time with them and really hanging out and listening can be huge. We also have to recognize that behavior influences behavior, and campers are going to do what we do a lot faster than they do what we say. So if we are not modeling the appropriate behavior, if we are not keeping our language and the topics of our conversation appropriate, if we are goofing off and chatting with our friends while someone is trying to lead an activity, all of those things, our campers gonna be like, oh, well, those rules don't really matter because they don't have to do it, so I don't have to do it either. So we need to be very careful to make sure that we're role modeling the appropriate behaviors. Just getting in there and playing, just having fun. Another thing that I have said for many years, and this isn't something I learned in clinical psychology grad school. This is something I learned from working at camp back in the day when I was in college. Sometimes one of the best ways to really break through to one of those campers who is just like stoic and they're just like, oh, I'm too cool for this, I'm not gonna get engaged, make a fool out of yourself. Even if it's like you trip over your own feet, you like spill something on yourself, like I'm really good at doing those things anyway, but I will admit that sometimes I've done it intentionally, and then I laugh at myself and I let them laugh at me, and you just make it okay by doing that. So sometimes just making a fool out of yourself is part of playing with campers and breaking through even those who are just the hardest nuts to crack. We also, in being proactive, want to establish our cabin or our camp expectations early on. If campers don't know what's expected, they can't live within those guidelines. And when we can do that together as a community, as a cabin group, to just say, you know, hey, like these are the things that we think are important. It's really great. It's empowering for the campers because they feel like they have a voice in what's going on, and you do it all together. And then, you know, have people sign, like put it up on a you know, piece of butcher paper or poster board or whatever, on the wall, and have everybody sign that they're committed to those expectations. And then when somebody steps out of that line, you have that visual, you say, like, let's look at this. Now, remember, we all agreed that we were not going to call one another names. And what I just heard was, you know, some name calling, and like, here's your name written, signed on this paper that says you're gonna, you know, be part of this community. So what do we need to do here? You know, so having that visual that you can refer back to where they've had the opportunity is really helpful as well. So the next one, and we'll talk about this in redirection as well, but using directives or I need statements can be proactive. If sometimes, and you know, if you've ever heard Michael Brandline speak, he often says, always, always, always say please. Because we want to role model appropriate behaviors, you should always, always, always say please. And I say there are a few things that are always. If someone is in a dangerous situation and are about to get hurt, I'm not going to say, hey, please, will you step away from that ledge? I'm going to say, step away from the ledge. Come here now. You know, so sometimes you need to be directive because sometimes it's a situation that requires it. It could be, you know, that in a lot of situations, there is some choice involved on whether or not they're going to do it, and you can use please, and it is great to model, you know, good manners. But knowing the lines on that and knowing, and I think that campers learn that too, that they will begin to understand, if they haven't already been in settings and situations where this happens, they'll begin to understand, when you mean business, you mean business. And we often here at camp when we're training, talk about using the mommy voice. And there's two different interpretations of the mommy voice. So some people interpret the mommy voice as being that sort of condescending baby talking that I was talking about earlier, that's not very dignified, where it's like, oh, you know, you shouldn't do that. And that is not going to win you points. That's not something that probably anybody, no matter their age or developmental age, is going to appreciate. There's also that mommy voice, though, that sometimes when you're using your I need statements, you really need to get it across, and that's that serious tone that I was talking about. And when we need to, and this is really, I'm jumping ahead a little bit because it's really more in the redirection use of this, but when you are giving a directive like that, keeping your voice low, slow, and soft is how you communicate that I mean business. So, you know, if someone has a rock and I see that they're about to throw that rock and it's likely to hit somebody in the head, it's a dangerous situation, and I would like, oh, put that rock down. Well, they'd be like, oh, whatever, you know, they're just playing with me, it's no big deal. But if I say, Jennifer, I need you to put the rock down. Put the rock down now. I didn't yell, I didn't scream, but the tone of my voice, low, slow, and soft, communicated, this is serious and I'm not playing, you know, like this is going to happen. So, you know, just think about those things. Yes, we want to be polite, we want to have good manners, we want to model that, but sometimes you need to mean business. Establishing routines, another great way to be proactive. It's sort of like setting expectations. If campers know what to expect, if they know what the routines are, then it's just comfortable. If they don't get to see the schedule, sometimes, you know, I've been in camp settings where they don't really publish a schedule because they want everything to be a surprise. That just doesn't work for some kids. Doesn't work for some people. They need to see laid out, like, this is what's going to happen. And you know, I think it's okay to have some surprises at camp, but everything should not be a surprise. Giving some structure, some framework, some routines can be great. You can help do that using cues. Those can be visual cues, they can be word cues, they can be musical cues. You know, I really saw that effectively used when I used to volunteer at Camp Boggy Creek in Florida, that they had a certain song that at the end of each meal, when it was time to kind of put the dishes away and kind of move on, they played a song, and then, you know, they have like this dancing time in the middle of the dining hall and everybody's excited. And then when it's time to kind of move back into just sitting and listening for instructions before being sent off to the next thing, there's another song that gets played, and people just, you know, kind of come to understand that that's the cue, that's, you know, what directs us to do what we need to do. And yeah, it's helpful. We also always want to keep an eye on our campers. Campers are most likely to get into trouble when they're not supervised. Also, during transition times tend to be another time when you're transitioning from one activity to another, because it's not structured time, right? It's that transition. So those are the times we always really want to be looking out for. The next thing on there, catch and being good. There's a psychologist, Edward Christopherson, who wrote a book many years ago, but luckily it's still in print, because when I have friends who are becoming first-time parents, I always buy it for them. It's called Little People, Guidelines for Common Sense Parenting. But one of the things he talks about in there is that, you know, people talk about, well, you got to catch them when they're being bad and you punish them, you do whatever. No, I mean, sure, like, you got to redirect that kind of thing, but catch them being good. If we catch them being good and we offer that positive reinforcement for doing the right things, then they're going to learn that that's how they get our attention. That's how they get, you know, the good stuff, is by being good. So yeah, it's kind of like earlier when I was talking about the kids who have attention problems, but they're not acting out. They fall under the radar and they don't get attention because they're not seeking attention. It's the same thing. If we aren't proactively giving our praise, giving our time and attention and interaction with our campers for being good, then they're going to find other ways to get it, and we're probably not going to like it as well. And that goes to building relationships with our campers, getting to know them, as I said, meeting each camper where they are, and then being consistent. What we do for one camper, we need to do for every camper. What we say as a rule applies equally to everybody. When we set those expectations, we need to follow through and, you know, make sure that we hold everybody accountable in the same way. That doesn't mean that there may be some individual differences because of ability that we may give a little more grace for, but it needs to be intentional. It needs to not be just because they're our favorite and they're so cute and, you know, I just don't really want to make this a thing. So redirection strategies. So, you know, hopefully 90% of your time you've been doing your proaction. You've created such a great environment that kids just aren't seeking your attention for other things. But sometimes things are going to happen. Hopefully this is no more than, 5 to 10% of the time. But some of the strategies you can use, planned ignoring is one. So Jade was talking about the tantrums and getting into power struggles and that emotional dysregulation and all of that. Planned ignoring is a great strategy to use in that situation, because they're seeking attention is what they're doing. When they're throwing a tantrum, having a meltdown, they are trying to get your attention, and what they need is some time and some space to calm down. And as caring people, we often, when we see that, we want to rush in and we want to comfort them. We want to, like talk them down off the ledge emotionally of what's going on. And we feed into the behavior because we're giving them all of this attention that they're so hungry for. Yeah, Jade says it can get a bad rep, but if it's used appropriately, it works so well. Absolutely. And I think why it gets a bad rep is that some people learn it and then think, well, you're supposed to use that for everything. It doesn't work for everything, but for attention-seeking behavior, it's a great tool. One of the things that you have to really be aware of, and you have to communicate well with your other staff and folks around, is that if you are doing planned ignoring, giving them the space and time to calm down under their own steam, one of the worst things that can happen is some other very caring individual comes along and jumps in and is like, oh, baby, what's going on? Are you okay? Years ago, luckily we've kind of addressed this over the years and made sure we do training, but yeah, we had some healthcare volunteers in my early days here at Camp who were just notorious for trying to jump in and make people feel better, and it just exacerbated the behaviors because we were trying to do planned ignoring. So we use a visual cue. We just kind of sit with our fingers. It's kind of like Charlie's Angels, like a PI, private investigator, but planned ignoring is PI. Private investigators, PI. So we just kind of sit quietly with our fingers in this shape, and we don't do like a big deal about it, but we just, know that when we see someone who is having a tantrum of some sort, to look around for their counselor and see if this signal is happening. And then we know, give them space. If we are walking with other campers, we're going to, walk on by. Yeah, planned ignoring can be very helpful in those situations. Prompting, sometimes people just need to be reminded. The prompt could be, remember what we talked about when we set community expectations, could be as simple as that. Proximity control means that we get in their space, particularly if you have one of those campers who is being disruptive. Have an activity leader trying to set up an activity and give the instructions, and they're goofing off, horseplay, whatever. Sometimes you don't need to call them out and make a big deal about it. You just need to go stand next to them, maybe a quiet hand on the shoulder, and it just kind of communicates that they know that that they need to be paying attention right now. So proximity control can be very helpful. I'm going through these quickly. Jennifer, I am not even sure if we said this was an hour, or if we said an hour and 15 or something.
I think we said it was an hour, but for those that can stay, please do. How about that?
Okay. So hurdle hopping means that we don't give them the whole big task at once and expect them to get from A to Z. We break it into hurdles that we can celebrate success on successive steps. It's also called chunking, but we help them get from A to B and then B to C instead of trying to get them all the way to the end. Sometimes motivation can come in just offering a friendly challenge. We have campers who are not hydrating well. Then make it a camp appropriate drinking game. Let's see who can finish their cup of water the fastest. You know, everybody drinks. Maybe you are trying to get them to take some responsibility in helping with things like wiping down tables at the end of meals. Then and somebody's being a little obstinate about that. Hey, I bet I can wipe down my side of the table faster than you can wipe down your side of the table. So just finding those little ways to motivate challenges can sometimes be a good way to redirect. Distraction can sometimes be a great psychological tool or just a physical tool that you can use. Sometimes if I see a couple of campers that tensions are just rising and you're just like, this is about to become an episode of some sort. It may become physical, it may become verbal shouting thing. Sometimes in the moment, the best thing is to just totally distract them. You're like, oh my, did you guys see this frog over here? I've never seen a frog like this. Come here and look at this. And maybe there wasn't even a frog there to begin with, but you like break the tension of the moment. You get them looking for the frog. And you're like, I swear there was a frog. Can you help me find it? And so, they start looking for the frog. It's not going to work with everybody in every situation, but when you can find that thing that can distract them, then sometimes whatever was mounting just gets forgotten. It can be very helpful. Regrouping is sometimes needed just because sometimes two people just aren't going to get along, and don't force them to stay together. And that may mean that you may not have an opportunity to like change cabin groups or anything like that, but they don't have to sit beside each other at lunch or at an activity. When you're walking activity to activity, use your proximity control, get between them, have one of them kind of in the front of the group and the other in the back of the group. Do some things that just kind of doesn't force them or allow them to be together if it's going to lead to some issues. And then finally, sometimes we have to just tolerate some annoying behavior, because kids are kids, people are people, and we just have to go like, okay, this is not a battle that I want to fight right now. And we have to be very choosy about that. We don't want to get into power struggles with our camper. Jade mentioned power struggles earlier. Nobody wins. When you get into those power struggles, nobody wins. We have to remember as staff and volunteers that we're in charge, and we are friends. We are building relationships. We are there to support and listen and do all of those things. But ultimately, we're also there to be accountable to the community expectations, and we're going to hold people accountable to that. So we need to remember our role and set limits when we need to, and then tolerate the things that we don't need to directly address, because it's just going to make it worse, exacerbate, or whatever. Campers who are festive, we talked about a little bit earlier. Those who may have an ADHD diagnosis, for example, it's those same things that we've been talking about are useful tools. You just may have to use them more often, and you may have to set up your proaction strategies so that you are touching on things more often, because the way their brains work, they are like pinging all over the place and processing things and knowing what's expected, knowing the schedule, knowing all the things. The more information you can give them, the more directive you can be, the more successful they're going to be. Providing that structure is great. And when you can allow for just free creativity, like in an art activity or something like that, that's also really great. But don't forget that you helping to provide some structure. You aren't really supervising or keeping things in check, then the likelihood of them starting to get on somebody else's nerves and create other issues is there. So just be cautious about that. Okay, some intervention strategies. You got to think about your organization's policies and what fits and what doesn't fit within your guidelines. Some things that you might consider though, timeouts. Oh, sorry, I didn't advance there yet. There we go. Timeout is timeout from positive reinforcement. Timeout is kind of like planned ignoring. It's a lot like planned ignoring, but it may need to last for a while. If you have ever heard people say, oh, well, a timeout should be 2 minutes for every year of age of I've heard people with these formulas and whatever, and it's too complicated. I as a psychologist, don't worry about that. It's just timeout from positive reinforcement. It is an opportunity for the camper who is feeling out of control emotionally, physically, to get back in control in their own time, in their own space, under their own steam. And as soon as they are back in control, they should be able to come out of timeout. They shouldn't have to sit there for 12 more minutes because that's what some magic formula said. And if it takes 35 minutes, it takes 35 minutes. I've in my role as a psychologist, not necessarily even as a camp person, I have worked with families on implementing this, and sometimes it's a little bit of a rocky start because they've been allowing these tantrums to happen, or the tantrum happens and they give in and give the Hershey bar or whatever it is that is the easy fix. And then they really start setting limits and being consistent and holding to it, and the tantrums may last 45 minutes. But that's that first time, maybe the second time, and then after that they're like, this isn't working for me anymore. I have to adjust my strategies. So that's where the consistency piece comes back into it. If we're going to use timeout, we have to be consistent in how we do it. If we do any consequences, which might be a loss of a privilege or something like that, we need to be consistent. If we say we're going to do it, we need to follow through with it. And always avoid taking away all of a whole activity. Don't punish by removing basic necessities such as food, water, use of a device that aids mobility like a wheelchair or a communication device. You never use those things as a loss of privilege, a punishment kind of scenario. But if that swimming is their favorite thing and that's where you're going next, and right now they're being a little punk and they're cursing at whomever or whatever, then you say the next curse word that comes out of your mouth, that's going to be 5 minutes off of swim time. We're headed there next, and for 5 minutes you're going to sit and watch everybody else swim. I'll sit there with you, but then then we'll swim. And they do it again. Okay, it's 5 minutes. You can keep adding 5 minutes, but don't take the whole period away as the first kind of sorry, my brain is blanking on the word I want to use, but you don't jump straight to that. You don't jump to taking that whole thing away. You kind of do the increments and give them opportunities for success. But if you say you're going to do it, you got to follow through and actually do it. Definitely seen it work, but definitely want to use it sparingly. It's not something you want to have done so much in the proaction that you don't ever get to this intervention, or in redirection that you're able to save it before you get there, if at all possible. Okay, trying to get us through. So 2 common mistakes to be on the lookout when we are intervening is talking too much. When someone's out of control, we need to step back and again, give them time to get back in control, because if we keep talking at them, it's like Charlie Brown's teacher. They're just hearing wah, 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 and it's going to escalate the behavior. It's going to make things worse. We have to be willing to step back, let them calm down, then we can talk it through. Then we can, you know, figure out the function of the behavior, see if we can address that, figure out strategies to not reach that point in the future, and negotiate all of that. But you can't do it when someone is emotionally charged, and you can't do that effectively when you are too emotionally charged. And we have to check ourselves and know when we need to tag out with someone else, or when we need to take 5 minutes for, you know, before we can have that follow-up conversation, because we're not going to be as effective if we don't do that as well. If kids are angry, don't touch them, don't box them in to make them feel cornered. Don't make direct eye contact with them. That can feel intimidating. It can feel confrontational. You can sit down, step away, tag out. Now, you want to be careful if you think they may become aggressive, that you are not sitting down and making yourself vulnerable. But if you can be out of reach of them and sit down, get on their level, on a lower level, without making yourself vulnerable, it comes across as much less threatening and can help de-escalate that situation. If you need to step away and tag out with someone else, then, you know, because you're emotionally charged, it's really important that you do that as well. And kind of a repeat from the last slide, also, you know, don't talk, because campers need to be in a positive state of mind before you can really do that follow-up work. So almost to the goal line, food for thought. All behavior is goal-directed. So no matter what it is, whether it's positive behavior or challenging behavior, it's all towards some goal. For most of our campers, and probably most of our staff, if they could, they would. They need our guidance. They need our structure. They need our limit setting. They need our support. And that's leads to the next one, because it's a camper's job to push boundaries. They are, you know, it's part of growing up, is learning your place in the world, learning what your limits are, especially you're going to see that in teens, but you see it in younger kids as well. And that's their job. But it's our job to enforce those boundaries. And we have to remember that we are in control, and make sure that they understand that. But our rapport with the camper and the whole group is the most important piece that leads to that success. And so building that community, building that rapport, meeting them where they are, all those things that we talked about early on in ProAction, that's where your true success comes in. So give me five things that you take away from today. And it doesn't have to be one person giving all five, but love to hear 5 things that people are taking away from today.
You know, one of my favorite ones is not a specific action per se, although I love the festive framing for kiddos. I'm going to have to steal that one for sure. But I just really appreciated your pragmatism. You know, I think my age, if you can't tell from my voice, I'm old. You know, we did a lot of babysitting, right? And you had a lot of experience with kids. And what we find our staff coming in have a lot less of that. And I think your comments about resilience are so on point. So how do we help our staff from that perspective as well? And that you're not meant to be a best friend. That we have responsibilities, but we can still have fun. And so again, just your pragmatism, I loved it. There was just so many things you said, and I found myself sort of shaking my head going, yep. So thank you for the festive kiddos, and thank you for just the pragmatism and reinforcing, I think, what, you know, we do all day long when we're at camp.
Awesome. Thank you, Lynn. And yeah, I think the other piece of that that I don't think I said earlier, but you know, I feel like 10 or 15 years ago, our staff and volunteers and campers kind of came in at this level with their coping and resilience, and we then worked to get them to here. Now they're coming in here, and we can't just use the same strategies that we used 10 years ago to get them from here to here. We have to drop down and get them from here to even what used to be baseline. And I don't have all the answers for that, but I think that realism and recognition is a helpful just perspective for us.
Well, and I think just real quick, also that the things you said about our campers from a standpoint of setting expectations, we may have to be better at articulating to our staff as well. So I don't mean any of this is a condemnation. I'm very excited about our youth. I think we've got lots of things that are wonderful. But just what are expectations, particularly when you come to a medical camp, because you did sign up for some stuff, guys.
Yeah.
And you know, pee and poop, it's here.
Yeah,
I'll give you gloves, but like, you know.
absolutely. Absolutely. All of the things. Just looking in the chat, plan ignoring and sharing with staff, making a fool of yourself. Tell you, I do it well, and it works. Making time out, camper led, not formula led, which, yeah, thanks to Beverly for kind of giving that idea with the Dungeons and Dragons. And then one-liners, mental update, and some tips and comebacks. Good. Are there any other questions that anybody has, or you know, anything that you had hoped to get today that we didn't talk about?
I have a question, Brandon.
Yes.
And I'm not
Good.
sure if it's related, but just in your experience, this summer we're going to have a high functioning Downs teenager with us.
Mhm.
And so there's been kind of conversation about where do you put her? She's a little bit younger than her age, but you know, I mean, so many schools keep kids in their same age grade, and I don't want her to lose out on the experiences that she would have because of that age. You know, it's sort of that, my thought is to keep her with her age group, but I don't know if that's the.
You know, I think for me, the starting point would be have a conversation with the parent.
Yeah.
Call the parent and say, you know, we want to set her up for success, and that may be with her same age peers, or maybe with the group that's like just the year, you know, like the next youngest or whatever. And we're okay with either. But what do you think? You know, where would she fit in? You know, it's honestly, and this goes beyond another diagnosis. It goes beyond the pandemic, but even just thinking about our campers, particularly those who have been on treatment. And you know, I think one of the things that I've seen is that for some of our patients who were on active treatment during the pandemic, they were not as affected as most of the rest of society, because they are, you know, used to being isolated and not being able to be around people. And for many of them, if anything, there were these new tools that came about because everybody needed to find other ways to connect via Zoom, via, you know, whatever. And so I think for some patients, that led to some opportunities that, you know, maybe helped them as compared to their peers from a few years before. And that's something I hadn't really pointed out, but I think it's something that's helpful to think about. But because of some of those social isolation things, we do sometimes see kids who are a little less mature than same age, typically developing peers. And if you have a mix of on treatment and post treatment campers, siblings mixed in, that may be true for some other campers who might do a little better in the next youngest age group than in their same age peer group. You know, there's no magic formula. I really, you know, would start with that conversation with the parent, but I do think that that's something that's maybe helpful to keep in mind for other campers as well, even if they don't have that additional diagnosis of Down syndrome.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just reading in the chat. All right. You know, to Jade's point about eligibility for kids transitioning into LIT program, support needs that you can't realistically and ethically fulfill. Absolutely, I think having that well defined, that was because of the the broad camper population that we serve here at Camp. When I first came here 15 years plus ago, we didn't have that well defined, and that was one of the first things that I created, was sort of an essential functions or basic qualifications to be a volunteer. And it's a self-assessment tool. It's available on our Camp website. I'm happy to send it to you directly as well. But if you go on our website to the volunteer pages, you'll see a link over on the site for basic qualifications. I'm pretty sure is how we have it listed. And it's, you know, it's what we need people to be able to do. And, you know, to Lynn's point of, you know, pee and poop and whatever, to be a counselor at camp, you need to be able to care for your own physical needs as well as assist with those of someone else. Is, you know, kind of one example of what that's like. But I think having it well defined in writing, as you know, readily available, everybody knows what's expected, and people don't start feeling like you're playing favorites because, you know, this was a favorite camper or whatever. It's like, no, these are the criteria. This is what we base it on. So yeah, I think that's very helpful. It's worked well for us here. For protocol for camper and staff dismissal from camp, again, we have very well written and defined expectations that say what does lead to disciplinary action, up to and including termination for staff and volunteers, and you know, what would lead to dismissal for campers. We tolerate a lot with campers. We don't tolerate a lot with staff and volunteers. For campers, because we do serve here those with moderate to severe disabilities, including autism, including you know, whatever, and part of our mission is providing that respite for the family members as well. We do tolerate a lot, and if that means that we need 2 counselors for a particular camper because of their potential for aggressive behavior, et cetera, then we're going to give them 2 experienced counselors. But that's something that we can do. And when, you know, you talk about realistically and ethically, you may not have those supports in place and may not be able to find them. So, you know, every camp has to kind of figure out where the line is that can't be crossed. And there are always going to be some situational situations. I guess that's redundant. Some components of situations that are going to need some independent consideration, particularly on the camper side. But the more you can define expectations up front, and make it clear what those lines are, then the easier it's going to be to cross them when you have to, not only with the camper, but also, with their family. And I'm sorry, I don't know if y'all see my puppy is trying to get into the action. She's like, you've been ignoring me for a really long time, and she's bringing me toys. So if you see a little black face nudging me over here, you'll know why that's going on. I'm going to throw her toy and let her go get it. Functioning labels aren't used anymore because they're very stigmatizing. Language has changed to support needs. Good, thank you. Thanks, Jade. Good point. And all right. Okay, cool. Well, I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts or questions. I think we caught up on what's in the chat. Again, the first link that you see is to this particular slide deck. And then at the bottom, the other link in QR code is from a session from COCA in 2018 that I did on child development. And it complements some of this really well and gives some things that help, especially staff like Lynn is talking about, who may not have worked with kids as much in the past. Like, hey, these are some typical things that kids do, or that they think, or that they're wanting out of life. And so that's in that other slide deck. So happy to share that as well.
Brandon, thank you.
Sure.
Fantastic. Great stories and examples. Loved all that.
When you get to be my age, you have lots of stories to tell.
Yes, I can relate. I've lived through many of those examples.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, y'all can, reach out to Brandon. He's very accessible, and thank you guys for joining us this afternoon and staying on a little longer. Really appreciate it. And I wish each and every one of you the very best as you get ready for summer camp. I know you're very busy, and hopefully you're not running around with your hair on fire yet. But I wish you all the best. So thanks for joining us. I hope you have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Brandon.